This episode may contain mature content. Listener discretion is advised. Content warnings can be found in the episode description.
Hey, we are the Lab Doctors. I'm Amanda.
I'm Dorothy.
And I'm Zhao Yong.
We are biomedical researchers who realized we still have a lot to learn about science.
So why not join us on this quest?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lab Doctors podcast. So this week we'll be talking about intergenerational trauma.
What is
So yeah, I don't know. So
Okay, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you all as the first question. But I'm planning to split this topic into 2 different episodes because there's quite a lot and I kind of want to cover it because the more I read up about it, the more interesting it got. So I will go into the specifics of how I broke it down later. But what do y'all understand or can decipher from the term intergenerational trauma?
okay, so I'll go first. I don't know if it's the same as generational trauma, but I feel like it's not because it seems intentional that you put the inter in front. But from what I understand about generational trauma is that each generation, like each time frame, they have like their own sets of trauma based on like the societal expectations or society at the time.
Cool.
And
yes.
it's different from generation to generation. So for example, my parents brought me up, so I'm affected by their generation's trauma, and my grandparents brought my parents up, so they are still affected by the previous generation's trauma.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's how I see it.
Dorothy?
Yeah, the second part of what Amanda said makes sense, like that between generations there's a difference and then maybe their traumas affect each other.
So I feel like y'all got most of it, but then let's just go into like
Definitions.
The real definition.
definitions from the American Psychological Association or APA, you know, the APA citation.
Oh my god, do you know that?
Huh?
The APA stands for American Psychological Association, and
you
that's
sure?
the APA referencing system that we use. I mean,
What?
that we use sometimes. Yeah.
What is biopsychology?
Yeah.
What? It's not like American paper.
They even have a handbook to tell you how to write the papers according to
I
their
thought it would be I thought the P would be like publication.
Oh yeah, maybe.
So
What's the definition? There's no pause. There was a long
So
pause.
just to be clear, for this episode, when we are talking about trauma, we are talking about psychological, so not physical trauma, not like the ones that you get hurt or something and
Physically.
yeah, physically. So if I use the shorthand trauma, I mean it to be psychological.
Okay.
So, and psychological trauma is defined as any disturbing experience that results in significant fear, helplessness, dissociation, confusion, or other disruptive feelings, intense enough to have a long-lasting negative effect on a person's attitudes, behavior, and other aspects of functioning. So that's trauma, and traumatic events can include anything that's caused by human behavior, so either physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. So I feel like emotional abuse is something that's not very clear, but it's like, emotional manipulation or like gaslighting or even like verbal abuse. So all these are forms of emotional abuse. But traumatic events can also be like large scale events like wars, terrorist events, or discrimination, prejudice. All these are forms of human behavior that can cause trauma.
So this is just what hurt them emotionally in the past, but we're not talking about them passing on their beliefs to us.
Not yet. Yeah, not
Okay.
yet. So this is just the definition of trauma. Trauma can also be caused by natural events like earthquakes or tsunamis. And it can also even be incidental events like the unexpected loss of employment or like a loved one. So all of these can be traumatic. Most importantly, traumatic events challenge our view of the world as a just, safe, and predictable place. Yeah. So basically,
Just safe and predictable.
the more uncertain we are after an event, the more traumatic it was.
The thing is about that like just safe and predictable world is like what I expect, but I know in my brain that it's not. And I'm like, why am I so stupid? Like if I just had the like how can as a scientist I say that everything is predictable?
But I feel like all the more as a scientist, we believe that everything is predictable because we want to see patterns. We want to see constant.
Right.
You know, just humanity doesn't conjure just safe and predictable, I guess.
Because that's just the nature of humans. We are just unpredictable because we are all unique little snowflakes.
He says sarcastically.
No, I really believe that. Okay, so the insidious part of psychological trauma is that it can be unrecognized, and if it is, it affects us subconsciously, influencing our actions, behaviors, and also affecting our mental health. So, like when people say that, oh no lah, I'm not crazy, I'm just a bit sad. Sometimes it's like maybe you experience some type of trauma, but you don't really realize that you were already traumatized. But going into the definition of our topic of interest. So, intergenerational trauma can sometimes be referred to as trans or multigenerational trauma. It's basically what Amanda described. It is defined as trauma that gets passed down from those who directly experience a traumatic event to subsequent generations. So we are talking about ancestors to descendants.
Yeah, okay.
So like a good example of what I think Amanda already described, like different generations have experienced different societal events. So like let's say the collective trauma of World War II, and more specifically individuals that had to live through the Holocaust. That was how intergenerational trauma was first identified. Because what was observed in a study in 1988 was that children of Holocaust survivors were severely overrepresented in psychiatric referrals by 300% compared to the general populace.
Wow. As in they were 3 times more.
Yeah. Likely to require psychiatric referrals. Yeah.
Okay, wow, that's quite a lot.
Yeah, so why this is intergenerational is because you see it as the children of Holocaust survivors and not Holocaust survivors directly.
But why are the children experiencing these kind of things?
Exactly. So
like I would be sad, but would I be traumatized such that I need psychological? I mean, this sounds so like insensitive. I guess because it's like I'm not in that position, so I don't understand.
Yeah, so I will go into why that happens, how trauma can be transmitted from generation to generation. But I think just to give a bit more like of a context, it has been reviewed that intergenerational trauma also occurred in marginalized groups such as the indigenous populations of North America and Australia. So people who were colonized, and also actually even on a more individual scale, like in a more personally relatable context, children of physically abusive. Okay, I'm not saying my parents were physically abusive. I'm saying like even for disciplinary reasons, even that is also considered physically abusive, and children that experience such physical abuse. I feel like abuse is a very strong word, but like I don't know if I'm also like because I'm traumatized, so I'm like, oh no, my parents are like.
No, but there's those kinds of like abuse where it's like it becomes from like my father beat me, so now I beat my child.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
okay. I mean, and mothers as well. In case you think it's not fair.
I thought it was the mother. Sorry.
So basically, children of physically abusive parents tend to also be physically abusive to their own children. So that's also a form of intergenerational trauma. So going to what I really want to discuss and what Dorothy asked just now, how is intergenerational trauma passed on?
Can we guess?
I feel like y'all can take a guess.
The only intergenerational trauma I see is that like, let's say my grandmother don't want to eat cow. Why is that trauma in the first place?
It might be like a cultural norm, but it might have stemmed from a trauma.
It's like last time maybe they saw the cow being butchered in the streets and then it looked cruel, so they don't want to eat beef, and then it's like now I can't eat beef. My grandmother doesn't cook beef, that kind of thing. That's the only it's not even a trauma, it's just an inconvenience because I like beef.
Oh no, but that's the thing. Like, so our cultural habits might also have initially stemmed from an intergenerational trauma or like something that was just completely practical. So like one example that I was listening to in a TED talk was that this lady, her family used to cook chicken in like a pot, right? And they always cut off the wings and the drumsticks because what was told was that it would taste better. Like it would cook.
Fly away.
No, I was thinking about old wives' tales and stuff.
The chicken can fly.
Like it will cook better. So, but like logically, it didn't make sense to the speaker. So she asked her mom, like, where did this like idea of it tastes better come from? So she also didn't know, and they had to go back like a few generations to finally realize that it's because the first person that cooked it like had too small of a pot. So like she couldn't fit the entire chicken in the pot. So she had to cut off the wings and drumsticks. But then like they have generation after generation, they have thrown away all these good, supposedly good parts of a chicken for no
this
reason.
is like the broken telephone case.
Exactly.
Translated wrongly.
So it's a bit like similar to that, but this is more like a psychological trauma. Anyway, yeah, Amanda.
I don't want to talk about previous generations because I mean, like, I think I'm privileged enough to have quite a decent upbringing. But I think I'll talk about my insecurities.
What are you going to pass to your child?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I constantly worry about this because I think I have a lot of anxieties and insecurities, which on the surface may not present, but it does govern how I treat other people. And I may project onto my children, which is something that I think is very prevalent in intergenerational trauma. It's the things that you don't deal with that make you treat your children or the next generation a certain way. And then that's how it gets passed down. And that's the insidious part about it because it's so under the surface. You know?
Yeah, like you just don't know that it's actually affecting the way you act.
Yeah. So like I can totally see like why the Holocaust survivors or people who lived through World War II, they like repress all this, but it still seeps through. Yeah, which is the scary part.
So, unsurprisingly, the exact mechanisms of intergenerational trauma remains controversial.
Of course.
I thought you were going to say unknown.
Controversial. But there are two generally agreed upon modalities, and that is social, which is represented by parental styles and techniques, parental styles, and physiologically. So for this
like
week's
what?
episode,
You can pass on the genes?
So for this week's episode, I'm going to focus more on the less controversial social aspect. But next week's episode, I'll go into a more controversial aspect of biological transmission, and this is more specifically through the epigenome.
Okay.
So spoilers.
Okay.
Yes. So let's start this off with talking about intergenerational trauma in animal models.
What?
So yeah, for social behavioral.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this very incredible scientist, Professor Isabel Mansui, Mansui, from the University of Zurich. So she used a mouse model. So
Mouse?
There's a lot of behavioral studies with mouse. Right?
Yeah,
Like whether they explore, whether they want to reach the platform.
yes.
Whether they want to eat, I guess, or whether they hide. But like, I guess because mice reproduce very fast compared to monkeys.
That's exactly one of the reasons. They reproduce fast, so you can see whether or not the trauma is passed down to the next generation at a faster rate.
Oh my goodness, what did they do to the poor mice? I imagine them throwing them on the floor. I hope it's not that evil.
Close.
When was this?
It started in 2001.
Okay. Animal ethics should have been quite strict already.
Yeah, but it, carried on to even today.
Okay.
Basically, to introduce trauma to the parents of the mice. Parenting was disrupted by separating mouse mothers from their pups at irregular intervals. So the pups don't know when the mom is going to be gone, basically trying to model some type of like
Abandonment.
Mom.
yeah, absent parents or like abandonment. But to further disrupt parenting, parental mice were either confined in tubes or dropped in water to induce stress in these parental mice.
And I suppose that's separated from the pups. Like the pups can't see it.
Yeah, the pups can't see it. So when the stressed parent is returned to the pups, they are generally more frantic and also distracted. So basically parenting again is affected. So this would make the parents ignore their pups, compounding the stress from separation on their offspring. So the offspring are also being traumatized because of traumatized parents.
Yeah, and if you don't know, like baby mice, right, they have to feed on the mother's milk up to like at least 11 days. So like if the mother's absent, they would probably be quite like, how do they survive? They are kind of blind also.
Yeah, exactly.
3 blind mice. Yeah, they are still blind at that young age. So I don't know if they can find the water source or like
Exactly.
or just be hungry.
Have like their needs met.
Yes.
Yeah. So naturally, pups of stressed parents displayed altered behavior as adults. And this altered behavior is also observed in the offspring's offspring.
Wait, like what kind of altered behaviors?
So let me just give terms because it's a lot easier this way. So let's just say the parental generation is P, generation P. And then in bio, we designate the first offspring generation to be F1 and then the subsequent generations to be like F2, F3, F4.
Okay,
all this, right? So let's say offspring in the F1 generation actually exhibit signs of the stress that the P generation showed without themselves being traumatized in the same way. So either confined in the tubes or dropped in water.
Yeah.
So then even the mice in the F2 generation also showed similar behavioral patterns towards parenting. So what was demonstrated is that intergenerational trauma is observed through these behavioral changes because the offspring kind of also learn social habits and like behavior from their parents. So if this is what they observe in the parental generation, that's what they are going to do in their own to their own offspring as well because they don't know any better.
I think it's quite funny that, not funny, but like I thought animals, right, they are like different from humans in the sense that they know what to do. It's like their natural instinct. So as in, like you always see, like say the horse give birth or the cow give birth.
Yeah, and then it's just
they immediately stand. It's
plop, plop on the floor, and then the mom just walk away already.
Yeah. So I thought instinctively they need to know. Or you like see birds, they just know how to mate like when they reach their age. It's like I don't think they've seen their parents mate or something. I feel like the family is not there anymore.
Yeah,
And they just know all these things. So I'm like surprised that for a pup that was not given the attention by their mother, they would pass this on to be absent in their children, in their future offspring.
Yeah, so it really depends on the type of animal you're talking about also. So certain animals that are more like communal, that live in a more like,
For lack of a better word, community.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
So,
makes
so
sense.
they learn social habits from other mice, but also mainly their parental mice.
Yeah.
Right.
So in humans. So this is also what is observed in humans. So parents may transmit trauma socially via parenting styles that have been impacted by their own traumas. And I feel like I already talked about this just now. But Dr. Yale Danieli, so she's a clinical psychologist and the director of the group project for Holocaust survivors and their children. And she has studied this and categorized 4 parenting styles amongst the families of trauma survivors. So these 4 styles include being numb, being a victim, being a fighter, or being a type of person categorized as those who made it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Say it again, sorry.
So numb, victim, fighters, and those who made it.
Yeah.
NUMB is as in NUMB.
NUMB, yes. So these describe the parenting style that trauma survivors might take on.
Those who made it. Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like-
nice, but... So, survivors who become numb generally seek silence by self-isolating or have a very low tolerance of stimulation from any kind. So they are generally very minimally involved with their children. They try not to get involved with their children because that's too stimulating for them. And it reminds them too much of like a high-stress environment.
Yeah.
Victims fear and distrust the outside world, so they try to remain inconspicuous and are frequently depressed or quarrelsome. Because when you are the victim in any situation, then it's hard to see how people are not attacking you, and this even applies to your own children. So fighters focus on succeeding at all costs, and this is their projection. They're trying to project a type of like armor in front of them. So this makes them intolerant to weakness or self-pity. So like if your child shows weakness or like self-pity, then it's like just man up. I feel like these terms have been thrown around quite a lot. And then for those who made it, they are characterized by their pursuit of socio-economic success, but also by their ways in which they intentionally distance themselves both from their experience of trauma and from other survivors. So basically it's like you're kind of in denial. You're like, look, I'm so successful, there's no way I'm a trauma victim. But if you don't deal with it, it always presents
Manifests
itself
somehow.
in another way.
It's like they overcompensate for the trauma that they have experienced.
Exactly. So because children experience and understand the world primarily through direct caregivers, so this is similar to the mice, they mimic their parents' behaviors and learn to navigate future relationships based on how they relate to their parents. So children may develop coping mechanisms out of efforts to avoid and or fix a parent's abusive behavior, and this may lead to anger, depression, neglect, emotional manipulation, or other problematic behaviors. So an example of this would be, let's say, a parent growing up through certain hardships like war or poverty. And I feel like this is kind of understandable why it would be traumatic. If a parent is a fighter, then they compare their own trauma to the trauma or the problems that their child is experiencing. So this may lead to a minimization of their child's own life experience or trauma. So I feel like, again, this is very natural because I have been through worse.
Yeah.
You know?
Why can't you just deal with this?
Like, this is not a problem.
Yeah.
So then this can cause issues with self-esteem and self-worth in a child, and they cope by believing that they are weak and unable to withstand trivial hardships. And if these insecurities are left unrecognized or untreated, then the child may assert them onto their own children, perpetuating the cycle.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, like I find this particular scenario like very human, but I feel like the issue here is like if you compare like maybe your child's hard day at work against like your very worst traumas, like you're always gonna win. Like and
in that sense.
And that's what's problematic.
It's the whole like two things can be bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Like, it shouldn't even be a competition because trauma is trauma, hardship is hardship.
Yeah.
And unless I wrote this in the script, drift compatible like in Pacific Rim, you can never fully comprehend. I feel like the reference is lost because you'll never watch Pacific Rim. But like for listeners who have watched Pacific Rim, you can never fully comprehend another person's experience.
Yeah.
And so it's not really about comparing or making a competition. It's just about listening and validating the people that you supposedly love throughout your life, you know?
Yeah.
So thoughts?
I feel like everything you said is something that I kind of know already, but just laid out in a very
Scientific.
systematic way. So yeah, and not to invoke my favorite TV show, but 911 deals with a lot of this.
Yes.
Yeah, like how your parents raise you and how you raise your children, and like how you can actually break that cycle by actually dealing with it. Like recognizing your traumas, recognizing your mental health issues, and then like make sure you don't pass it down. So I think it's very important. I mean, personally, I think it's important, but some people may not think that it's important.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I mean, it all depends on the person at the end of the day.
I think your part about it's not a competition, I feel like I'm guilty of that.
No, but I think we are all guilty of it. It's just how we relate to the world, you know? It's how we find things that are in common with another person.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was thinking more of, so intergenerational, maybe it's like because there are significant events, but I think within like you and your peers also, right? You will also have this kind of competition. Like you will maybe say to your colleague or to your sibling, like, why you cannot handle this stress.
Yeah.
Which is why I actually do sometimes. Like, why you don't just go and find like a solution to your stress? Why you
Which is why I feel the need to disclaimer. I mean, I'm not a mental health expert, and I mean, we're all not mental health experts. And I feel like what I say mostly, I mean, besides the ones that are like thoroughly researched in this episode, is like a lot of my own personal viewpoints also.
Yeah.
And so I kind of just want to end this episode by saying that as humans, we're all imperfect.
Yeah, we're all different also.
Yeah. So intergenerational trauma is not about like assigning blame or like making a competition or like trying to find reasons for like, I mean, you should find reasons for your traumas and insecurities, but like it's not about blame.
Yeah. It's to highlight the problem and then you know it and then you can address it correctly.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, like, again, I feel like I'm not one to judge because I've probably traumatized like even my own parents. Like you were mentioning how like intergenerational trauma is like sounds one way, but I feel like it can be two-way because like based on your own traumas and it affects how your parents choose to parent. And yeah, it's probably way more complex than it is.
Yeah.
But I've also probably traumatized family members like my siblings, my friends, my peers, my teachers. I feel I probably traumatized a lot of teachers. And I'm like really honestly quite haunted by all of these like actions that I've done like even today. So yeah, like
you're that meme lying awake in bed thinking about everything that I've done.
And so definitely not gonna judge. It's more about being able to identify that we all have traumas and we all, like, regardless of where it comes from, we need to deal with it, and that seeking therapy or counseling is not just for people with like quote unquote mental issues, because we all have mental issues. So hopefully, you know, listeners, if you hear this, it's more about finding a solution to address your issues so that you don't perpetuate them into the next generation, so that our next human generation can hopefully be more secure, be more confident in themselves. And make the world a better place.
Wow, that's very optimistic of you.
Make it a better place. Okay.
Yeah. So as usual, I know heavy topic, but as usual, do consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and following us on Spotify. A like and a comment would really help us out. A rating will also help us out.
You can also follow us on our social media, Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, and feel free to DM us any questions.
Alternatively, you can email us at thelabdoctors@gmail.com. We'll post all the article links in the episode description, and stay tuned for next week.
Part 2.
Bye.